Since Lies of P has finally dropped on Xbox Game Pass, I've been playing that over the past few days. I had to jump from Starfield to this pretty quickly, so going from a space-themed RPG to a Souls-like is an interesting shift. But of course, if you guys don't know, I am a huge fan of Souls and Souls-like games, and I did make nearly a 1-hour video the other day about Souls and Souls-like games, so go check that out after this video, of course. Lies of P is a game published by Neowiz, a South Korean company. The game is a Souls-like take on Pinocchio, a character that you play who must traverse a grim world in the now destroyed city of Krat, which has been overrun by killer demonic puppets who are just slaughtering everyone left and right. There's also a disease that has turned people into zombies, and the whole thing is an insane mess. Let's just put it at that. Lies of P takes a lot of clear inspiration from FromSoftware's games, but I have to say, Lies of P understood the brilliance of the FromSoftware formula and how to replicate it in a way that works so well for its own identity and story. But like with most games, there are great elements, but there are also some things that were annoying, bothersome, or pretty bad. I must say though, Lies of P is polished, and at launch, it worked like a charm. This is honestly great because I was afraid we'd get just another disappointment, but I'm glad to say that I was wrong. Since the demo, a lot of things were tweaked, so thankfully we had that demo to give our feedback on, and thankfully, some of that feedback was definitely taken into account. There's a lot to get through, so let's just dive right into it. I'm going to start out small because most of this review will be dedicated to the gameplay aspects of Lies of P, seeing as this is a Souls-like, gameplay is pretty much where this game is advanced in the most. Now, as I mentioned in my video on Souls and Souls-like games, most Souls-likes tend to have disconnected or vague narratives that require player exploration to piece the story together. Now, Lies of P is quite different from that, in that the story is very clearly presented to you. The game starts out with Pinocchio waking up in a chair, being spoken to by a butterfly woman who instructs Pinocchio to help out with the situation in Krat. Pinocchio then goes to a room in the building he's in, and this is where you can pick what type of weapon you want to start with. There are 3 classes, with each emphasizing its own fighting style and combat techniques. I will get into these in detail a bit later in this video. There are some familiar elements in Lies of P that you will remember from the original tale of Pinocchio, like Geppetto and Gemini, the talking cricket. However, Gemini is not a cricket and is rather a puppet inside a lantern that provides guidance to Pinocchio and light in darker areas of the game. Characters like Fox, Kraft, and Alidoro are present but are now criminals who wear animal masks instead of being actual animals. For the most part though, the story of Lies of P isn't really the most prevalent feature of the game until closer to before you finish it. Most of the levels do not really deal with the story until around the final act. This is a bit disappointing from my point of view because the story is already there. Why not involve it a bit more? Clearly the story is not meant to be vague like in Dark Souls, so why not give it a bit more prevalence in the game? Again though, some people might not mind this point, and to be honest, it wasn't really that big of a deal because I was pretty much just enjoying the game with or without much story involved. One of the things I liked about Lies of P is that there were some little side adventures you could take on. For instance, certain paths led you to uncovering things like ordinary citizens who were negatively impacted by the situation in Krat. Madness-afflicted humans that attack you and serve as bosses also provide some level of story, as you really see how this madness affliction has affected humans. Some are particularly sad, like a woman who thinks a puppet is a real baby, or a man who vows to kill all puppets but has driven himself mad in his quest for vengeance. A lot happens in Lies of P that isn't part of the main questline, but has a role to play in the world-building elements of the game. I, for one, really liked the atmospheric nature of the story. I think it had a lot of character and uniqueness to it. It was grim and dark, and to be honest, I absolutely loved it. Now, like all of my reviews, I usually don't spoil the story ending, so I'm going to stop there so that when you play this game, you can fully enjoy the story for yourself. Seeing as Lies of P is a Souls-like, it's a hard game, and by hard I mean that this game was very difficult to the point of frustration sometimes. It's not like it's impossible to play or impossible to beat, but if you look at the player stats, you can see that most players could not finish this game. The bosses are a massive challenge, and you'll probably die quite a good number of times while you try to figure out a strategy to even start attacking the boss. And I can assure you, you will die a few times, 100% guaranteed. Lies of P subreddit is full of posts from people who have played basically every FromSoftware game there is to be offered in the Souls genre and have found themselves stumped from the level of difficulty present in Lies of P. That's not to scare you away from this game, but I want it to be clear that the difficulty is not low in this game under any capacity. For the most part, Lies of P is a linear game that's set up like most FromSoftware games you've probably played. It's been likened quite a lot to Bloodborne and Sekiro, but I think that Lies of P does have a lot of combined elements to it that makes it very much its own game, but with clear influences. There isn't really any exploration in the game outside of the restricted areas that you deal with, which is fine. I don't think every game needs to be an open world, that's for sure. When you start up Lies of P, you are met with the option to pick a starting combat style. This pretty much sets the tone for your fighting against enemies for most of the beginning. I did find that you can change this fighting style if you don't like it by assembling different weapons and leveling up certain things over others, but more on that later. The three paths are as follows: Path of the Cricket, Path of the Bastard, and Path of the Sweeper. Path of the Cricket uses the puppet's saber and focuses on simple slashes with moderate damage. Path of the Bastard is focused on dexterity or technique and uses a rapier. This fighting style is about speed and agility and includes quick blows to the enemy. Path of the Sweeper is the greatsword one, which uses slow swings with higher damage. Personally, I prefer Path of the Bastard, but Path of the Sweeper is great because I may be a little biased to greatswords, but you can deal a lot of damage. However, Path of the Bastard is probably the best one gameplay-wise, just from how versatile it is. Also, it does look visually awesome when you get those nasty strikes in on the enemy. As you traverse the world, you're met with standard enemies and elite enemies. The elites are pretty tough to fight, but if you can master all the techniques this game has to offer in fighting them, you'll be able to take them on easily. You can evade them if you don't want to, though. Bosses are a whole world of their own, which is why I'm going to talk about them in an entirely different section of this video. Gameplay in Lies of P focuses more on the perfect blocks than anything else. If you can master the timing on a block, you'll certainly have a higher chance of success against any enemy present in the game, including bosses. You can also dodge and sprint away from enemy attacks, but this isn't something I recommend using as much. Sure, if you play Dark Souls and are used to Dark Souls combat, you may be tempted to use this combination to evade enemies, but it's not always smart to use that in Lies of P. I can say this with full confidence because when I played the demo all that time ago, I kept trying to Dark Souls my way through the Parade Master and miserably failed. Only until I started practicing my perfect blocks did I really find the right strategy. Perfect blocks are really based on timing, and that's something that you have to train early on in the game, otherwise you will have a really rough time with this. The thing is, there isn't really any reward per se for perfect blocking. Like, you won't be able to stagger your enemies much. However, I think this was patched recently, so you may not face this if you haven't played the game just yet, but at least when I played it, after several perfect blocks, that's when you saw any substantial response from the game. So for instance, the weapon breaks and then it makes the entire fight much easier to deal with, because their weapon has very little damage after that point. Weapon assembly is one of my favorite parts of Lies of P because you can get insanely creative with what weapons you're rocking in this game, and you can dramatically change your playstyle depending on this. For example, I attached a fire axe head to the police baton and I got a really powerful weapon. Although its range is smaller, it's powerful, so I could not care less because one-shotting enemies seemed way more lucrative than anything else. I also attached the greatsword blade to the rapier handle because that sounded like a good idea, so I did it. An even better weapon would be attaching a wrench head to the police baton and using fire on it. You'll see that after you fight the King's Flame Fuoco though. Leveling up in Lies of P requires Ergo, which you can get by killing enemies and bosses. Personally, I just farm Ergo because leveling up really does help you out a lot. By increasing my health and stamina, I was able to last a lot longer in boss fights, and then I focused more on increasing my physical attacks so that my actual swings dealt way more more damage. So I recommend farming ergo in the Krat Central Plaza. Guaranteed the easiest place to get as much ergo as possible early on in the game without needing to do too much. As difficult as Lies of P is, I found myself absolutely immersed in this game. I don't know. Something about this game just screams amazing to me, and I actually really did enjoy it. Its gameplay was challenging but satisfying, and it really got my competitive nature kicking in full swing because I just simply would not give up on this game no matter how many times I died to a single boss. And dying is very frequent for me in Lies of P, I will have to admit. There are a lot of items you can throw at bosses too, so I recommend taking advantage of these because they can actually deal a surprisingly high amount of damage. There's also the Legion arm, which is Pinocchio's metal arm that you can swap out to do different things. The starter arm just simply deals some damage by hitting your enemies, but you gain a grappling hook arm, and then you gain some other things like an electricity arm, a fire arm. There's just a lot of unique and cool things like that in this game that I really think adds more to the gameplay elements. You have so many tools at your disposal to fight enemies and elites and bosses that I really can't say that this game doesn't give you enough. It's a tough game, yes, but if you take advantage of what it gives you, you can make the game a lot more playable. It's all about finding a rhythm and adapting that rhythm for each new boss you face. Aside from the standard upgrades, there is the P organ, which you unlock the ability to use after beating the scrapped Watchman boss, which is the third major boss in this game. This allows for you to add some features and upgrade other parts. For example, you can add a new bar to the Fable arts, which gives you more Fable attacks to use. That's just one thing that you can do though. After chapter 3, you do get access to the Vanini work, which allows for you to create new grindstones that you can use to actually set your weapon kind of on fire. So it's pretty cool, and it deals more damage on your enemies, of course. Speaking of the Fable arts, this is a bit of a magic system in the game. As you fight bosses, you get access to Fable arts, which activates a powerful feature of your weapon that deals a satisfying slashing blow to your enemies and some devastating damage. Now look, Lies of P doesn't really have ranged attacks in the same way that a game like Elden Ring does, so don't expect that you're gonna have like magic spells that you can use to attack an enemy from a distance. Yes, there are throwables like an electric blitz, which yes, those things do help a lot, especially when you're getting towards the enemy's like kind of end stages. But the thing is, they're not really in the same way that you might think they are. Like, they're not going to provide you that same sort of range damage that you want. For the most part, Lies of P focuses a lot on that close quarter kind of melee combat. There isn't really magic or bows and arrows, crossbows, none of that stuff. So if you're okay with that, the game's probably great. If you're somebody that doesn't really like that, I mean, there's not really an easy mode, or there's not really a way to cheese bosses as easily as you would want. So that's kind of the only downside for some people who are more used to Elden Ring's combat. I was playing Elden Ring the other day. Of course, there's some things in Elden Ring that make it way easier to fight bosses, but in Lies of P, you kind of have to use what you're given. And it's not so much, but it's not nothing. Alright, that was a lot to get through, but we're not done yet because I really want to talk about the bosses specifically for a bit. Lies of P is a tough and unforgiving game that does not give you a semblance of something called a break. This game will toss every nightmare at you that you could possibly imagine, and each boss gets tougher and tougher as you go. This is also evidenced by the fact that with each boss, less and less players complete the boss fights. Bosses in Lies of P tend to work in two phases. The first phase is tough but manageable. But the second phase is where things really start to get a bit more intense. This second phase of any boss fight typically involves much harder attacks and much more complicated features that your initial strategy might not be so good against anymore. And damn, do I love the bosses in this game. They are so difficult, and I mean difficult in every way possible. I don't think I have ever raged at a video game like this before in my life. I am being serious when I say that I'm a typically very chill person. Rarely do I ever get mad at games. I just accept that I lost and I move on, but there are two games that have invoked a primal rage from me: Call of Duty and this freaking game, and maybe Elden Ring actually. But anyways, Lies of P invoked it more, if that makes any sense. Every time I died, I felt frustrated, and then I just went right back into the ringer because I wanted to beat the bosses so desperately. And once I saw the boss health bars deplete, I literally started cheering because it really is accomplishing. The bosses are all so tough, and each one gets harder and harder to fight, and yet I just wanted to keep playing. I couldn't accept defeat. I wouldn't accept defeat at any turn. Even if I needed like 2 days to figure out how to beat a boss. By God, I told myself that I'd do it. And yeah, that was really dramatic. But my point is, I really love the boss fights in this game, because this was probably the first game that made me feel like I was facing down something so challenging and made me feel like my character was truly the little guy in this scenario. There are main bosses and optional bosses that you can fight in this game. Optional bosses are pretty neat because you can get some cool gear. Like the gear I'm wearing in this clip, I got that from an optional boss called the Survivor, who apparently felt a lot of guilt about killing a lot of puppets and was going insane and couldn't tell if he was killing people or puppets. Lots of guilt and morality and all that. In any case, I decimated him, got his outfit and mask, which I gotta say are pretty snazzy. The boss fights in this game require a few tries before you can really get the perfect strategy, and once you've gotten a strategy, be ready to adjust it, because they sometimes launch new attacks at you just because they can. This game feels like a FromSoftware game, but it also feels like it's its own thing, and I really liked that. I got the FromSoftware feel I wanted, but I also got a new and unique experience that required a lot from me as a player. I mentioned earlier that the game just recently got a patch. Like as of recording this morning, the patch came out. So this patch basically updated some of the game's tougher bosses. They reduced some of their health bars, increased the chance of breaking stances. They increased the frequency of the stagger and the window of stagger so that you can get the fatal blows in faster. Still though, it's a tough game, don't get me wrong, but these changes should definitely make some of those harder bosses a bit more forgivable in some way, I guess. Speaking of which, as I beat the bosses, I'm also writing guides on our website, www.thedzshgroup.com. Link is in the description, of course, and those guides basically explain how to best beat the bosses, including all of my tricks and tips that helped me win. If you're playing through this game and need an extra bit of help, go check those out. Most bosses after the first two allow you to unlock something called a Spectre using this thing called a Star Fragment. Now, you can summon this NPC to help you during your fight, but personally, I don't recommend that you use it when you first face a boss. Try to analyze their attack patterns and learn, and then engage with the Spectre. This is a system that I felt worked the best for me. There are some really epic moments in the boss fights too, and they are visually crazy. I honestly don't know about you all, but this game has made me love the Souls genre even more than I already did. Like I mentioned earlier, Lies of P takes place in the fictional city of Krat, which has been overrun by killer puppets in a zombie apocalypse of sorts that has left the once vibrant and prosperous city in a state of ruin as people struggle to survive and fall victim to the afflictions present in this world. And I absolutely loved the world of Lies of P, and I thought the levels were more or less well designed. There were a few levels that had me a bit frustrated, such as a platforming level that took place in the cathedral. If you haven't gotten there yet, you will see why I hate it, but it's crazy that with each turn and each door and each hallway, there is something just waiting to attack you. Just when you think you're in the clear, something else has to come and attack you. It's absolutely wild. I personally thought the level design of Lies of P worked very well for the type of game this is. There are periods of intense and continuous combat and other periods of rest, which is obviously the best way to set up a game of this nature. I'm no expert in level design or anything like that, but I've played enough games to know that this game is well structured overall. Some of the mini-bosses and elite enemies are positioned in a way so that if you want to avoid them, you can. You just need to be able to run fast enough. Also, realistically speaking, you can get by entire levels without fighting anything. You just need to be ready to gun it as fast as you can, because enemies will chase you for some time, but at some point they stop and turn around, especially if they can't see you anymore, so you can avoid most of the enemies. There are many different places in Krat that are explored in this game in sets called chapters. Each chapter introduces something new with it, such as a new enemy, a new system, or something of the sort. The systems all seem to work well together, and there's no way that you will have to redo an entire level if you die, unless you really want to. You just need to find shortcuts, which come in the forms of doors, ladders, things like that. This helps you get to spots that you may have died at quickly. Personally, I felt like there should have been a stargazer that was close to some of the bosses. The stargazer that was positioned in the first boss location was perfect, but some of the stargazers are far away enough that you have to run through a bunch of enemies and it gets really annoying to have to do. It's just a nitpick, but it's not hard to die to bosses in this game, so you may need to see a lot of the same thing over and over again. The Stargazer system is basically Lies of P's version of Bloodborne's lanterns or Dark Souls bonfires. You can rest here, upgrade some stuff, assemble some weapons, refill your health flasks, but in this game they're called power cells, I think, or pulse cells. I forget. But of course, like in Dark Souls and Bloodborne, the enemies do reset. Unless we're talking about big bosses, those don't reset, but for the most part, most of them reset, some of them don't. The assets in this game and the character designs are all very cool. It does the art style well, which I do appreciate, and I also really like the boss designs. I think they just hold a menacing air to them. Personally, I just like the era that this game takes inspiration from, that Belle Epoque era, so I found myself enjoying the visual aspects a lot more than I thought I would. It's honestly crazy to think that this is not a FromSoftware game, because as I was playing it, I almost forgot that FromSoftware didn't make this one. It just feels so much like a game that they'd make, but I think that that isn't a bad thing. I know a lot of people have dunked on Lies of P for being a sort of Bloodborne copy, but I didn't really care if it was or wasn't a Bloodborne copy. A good game is a good game, I'd say. And overall, Lies of P has now slotted itself in my top games of 2023 with how amazing it really was. I haven't finished the game just yet, as I still have a few more bosses to go through, but I'm really loving it as a game. It's got just the right amount of challenge and action to make me enjoy it, and mechanically, it's actually way better than I thought it would be. Lies of P is also a polished game, which is amazing. Like, nothing in this game screamed out to me that it needed to be fixed dramatically and immediately. It's nice that they patched it a bit to make it a little more forgiving, but that's not really finishing the game. That's more like taking feedback on difficulty and tuning it, which most games do anyways. I never faced crashing or game-breaking bugs, extreme visual glitches, nothing. This game is well made and it is really impressive as a game. It didn't innovate much beyond the genre of Souls games, but I don't really think that that's a bad thing. I guess I'm of the opinion that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It has its own identity enough that I don't really care much about this point anyways. I do wish the story was just a bit more involved, but like I said, it's kind of a nitpick. This isn't the end of the world or anything like that. The game is fine. And by fine, I mean it's a great game. But it's a really hard game, and because of this, I don't think I can recommend that everyone play this one. Even for people who have played every single FromSoftware game ever, I don't think I can recommend that to all of you either. However, this is a strong however, I really liked this game. So, if I had to give it a numerical score, I'd say Lies of P is a solid 8 out of 10. It's got some problems here and there, and its difficulty can be very brutal, but I personally really enjoyed it. So I'd say it's earned a spot as one of my more higher rated games. I will say though that don't let the difficulty intimidate you. Like, if you want to take a stab at this game, take a stab at this game. Don't like take my review and think, oh, this game is impossible, I can't play it. No. Play it, but if you can't continue or if you don't want to finish it, that's okay. You should be totally okay with that. The game is not easy. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on a single upload. Comment below your thoughts on Lies of P, and don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. The link to that, as well as all of our other links, are in the description below. And in the meantime, I got a Cyberpunk 2077 video to make.